and welcome to Promo Insiders, an ASI media podcast that covers the issues that matter most to the promotional products industry. I'm Hannah Rosenberger with ASI, and I'm here today with Michael Hingson, a best-selling author, consultant, and motivational speaker with a long career background in sales and a remarkable story. On September 11th, 2001, Michael, who's been blind since birth, escaped the World Trade Center by navigating 78 flights of stairs with his guide dog, Roselle. He'll be one of the speakers at the ASI Power Summit in October. Michael, thanks so much for being here to talk with me today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, I don't want to steal the thunder from your Power Summit talk, but can you give our listeners a little bit of a glimpse into your story?
Sure. The story's pretty visible anyway. I worked in 2001 for a computer company, Quantum Corporation, and I was hired to open an office in New York City. And by the time all was said and done, we opened the office on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. I hired a staff, but also being blind, I did something that most people don't do and people who with eyesight should do. And that is I learned all I could about the World Trade Center. So I don't rely on signs, I rely on knowledge. And specifically, I learned where various things were in the World Trade Center. I also learned in detail anything I could about emergency preparedness, what to do if there was a problem, where the emergency exits were, all the different ways to move around the World Trade Center. And what I didn't realize, but I figured it out many years later, was that created a mindset in me that said, you know what to do if there's an emergency. And I did the whole preparation because there had been a bombing in 1993 in the parking lot on the fourth sublevel of the World Trade Center. Didn't do much damage, but it did cause a lot of people to move out, which is why we were able to get office space in late 1999 into 2000. So I learned all that I could because as the leader of an office, I needed to do what any leader would be able to do. And what most people don't understand about blindness is blindness isn't the problem that I face. The problem I face is the lack of education and lack of understanding of other people about what blindness is all about. And what blindness is really all about is I do the same things that you do, though I may do them in different ways and using different techniques, but still do them. The abilities are still the same. The knowledge is still the same. And as I said, for me, learning what to do in the case of an emergency was very important. And it's much more powerful than just waiting until there is some sort of emergency and then you look for the signs and say, this is where you go, which may or may not be visible to you. And so my story basically is that I knew all of that. And because of the knowledge that I had, I was able to escape and survive the terrorist attacks on September 11th. I should also explain, and you mentioned it, I used my guide dog, Roselle. Guide dogs don't lead blind people. Guide dogs guide. The job of a dog is to make sure that I walk safely. My job is to know where to go and how to get there. And people don't understand that. Well, you're blind. How could you know? Well, you're sighted. You know things because you have signs, and that's the problem. I use other techniques, but I learn things. And I learn what I need to know in order to travel around so that I can also direct my dog with commands. And again, that's part of the story. And so the bottom line of all of that is that because we did in advance the things that we should, we survived.
Yeah, talking of Roselle and the relationships with the many guide dogs that you've worked with during your life. Your new book talks about the relationships that you've had with your guide dogs. And you've also said that working with them has taught you more about teamwork than a lot of other things have. So what have those relationships taught you and why is that?
What I've learned over the years is that in reality, while guide dogs or in any dog, I think, unless they're just incredibly traumatized for some reason, dogs do love unconditionally. They don't trust unconditionally. And that's important because what it really means is that they're looking for the opportunity to trust. They're open to trust, but we have to earn their trust as I expect them to earn my trust. And that two-way expectation, when we recognize it and work it properly, helps us develop a very powerful team. And teamwork is really all about trust. And so one of the things that I've learned, and we talk about it in the new book, Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs, about being brave, overcoming adversity, and moving forward in faith, we talk about the fact that trust can help in addressing and dealing with fear. The book is all about controlling fear because I realized at the beginning of the pandemic that although I've been speaking publicly and traveling the world since the beginning of 2002, basically, I've not taught people how they can learn to control fear as I was able to control it on September 11th. And so the result is we decided to write this book, and I did it with a co-author, Carrie Wyatt Kent. We both really collaborated to write it. But it was my story, and I did a lot of the shaping of it. The bottom line is that what we did is we wrote this book that is supposed to, and I believe will help teach people how they can learn to control fear and not let it, as I would put it, blind you or overwhelm you. Rather, you can use fear as a tool to help direct you and guide you in what you do. And so we talk about the lessons I've learned from working with guide dogs. Dogs, for example, don't do what if all the time. They don't go about, well, what if this happens? Or what if a dog sneaks up behind me? Dogs live in the moment, and we should do more of that. We really create so much fear in our lives because we do way too much what if. And the result is that most of what we worry about will never happen anyway. And it is involving things over which we have no control. And we should learn to worry about just the things that, and not even worry about, but focus on the things that we can control and don't worry about the rest of it. Because the reality is, if you worry about that sort of thing, it's only going to stress you out. And the whole idea is to really avoid stress as much as possible. Guiding is very stressful for dogs. And so my job is to keep that stress level down as low as possible by encouraging my guide dogs, by directing them, and having the confidence and knowledge to give them the commands that I need them to have in order to keep us functioning as a team.
You've mentioned already your career in sales and management that you had prior to kind of moving over to public speaking. What was it like to transition from primarily sales to a public speaking career? And why was that the trajectory that you decided to take after 9/11?
Well, to answer that last part first, after September 11th, the media got my story and we started getting a lot of requests for interviews. And I realized that there was a great opportunity to educate people about blindness and to help them understand they don't need to fear it, to teach them about guide dogs and what guide dogs do and don't do. Although, again, it's a very hard task because people have some extremely wrong and poor attitudes ingrained in them. But if I could teach people how to deal with all that better, if I could teach people how they could learn to control fear now, if I could inspire them and help them not worry about and learn lessons that we should learn from things like September 11th, then it was worth doing. Transition, not really so much, because one of the things that I learned early in my career in sales was that on any given day, I could be talking to anybody from boards of directors on Wall Street to IT people to any number of other kinds of people. And the reality is that it's all about public speaking. And so when I was invited after September 11th to start to speak to organizations and to people, I realized that instead of selling computer hardware and technology and managing a hardware sales team, what I was going to be doing was going to be to sell life and philosophy to people and managing myself and also whatever team I chose to work with me and making those speaking engagements possible and arranging them. So it's selling another product, and it's really all it is. On the other hand, I learned a lot about how to read audiences, probably in more detail than I had learned just as a salesperson speaking in different groups. But at the same time, the skills were still the same. So I really believe public speaking is another kind of sales. In my case, it's selling philosophy, it's selling life, and it's selling the idea that we're all in the same world and we need to learn to work together. So it's really not any different than selling a piece of computer hardware, just selling a different product, sometimes dealing with a little bit more esoteric kinds of concepts, but even more important and more basic, and working to get people to understand that is my job.
You've talked a little bit so far about kind of the education that you do as far as making people more aware of the role of guide dogs and other things to do with disability and access. And that seems like it's been a large part of your career. So tell me a little bit more about that work and what your goals with it have been throughout your career.
The unemployment rate among employable blind people in this country for many years hovered around 70%. Remember what I said? Unemployment rate among employable. It's dropped some, but it's still in the 50 to 60% range. The Gallup polling organization for a number of years back in the 80s and 90s, when they were studying people's fears, found that one of the top 5 fears that people had was blindness, going blind, not even disabilities, but going blind, because we emphasize eyesight so much that we leave out so many other things that can give us a lot more powerful ways of functioning and getting around in the world. And so for me, what I decided to do early on as a blind person was to recognize that blindness wasn't the problem. It's our attitudes about blindness that are the real problems that we face. And that I could do the same things that other people do. The only difference is I may not use the exact same techniques. So people regard blindness as a disability. Well, I regard eyesight as a disability because you people rely on things so much. You have light on demand because of Thomas Edison inventing the electric light bulb in 1878. But the reality is that all that gives you is light on demand, and it covers up your disability of being light dependent. And how do I know it's a disability? Just watch the power go out in a room and everybody starts scrambling to find their smartphones or their flashlights because they want to get light on demand back up and running. So you cover up your disability really pretty well, and we spent a lot of time giving you the tools to do that. But the reality is it's not the only disability in town. Disability is a characteristic that we all have, and it manifests itself differently for different people. Disability does not mean a lack of ability. People say that to me all the time, but it's not. Disability is a characteristic, and it's something that all of us share in one way or another. So some of this has evolved in me over time, but the whole idea about being able to function as a blind person is something that I knew fairly early on. My parents really instilled that into me, and that'll be part of the story that we get to talk about at the ASI Power Summit. But the reality is that we're all in this world, and we should do a lot more to try to work together and understand each other and not be so prejudiced as we are.
So, over the course of your life, you've talked with a huge variety of audiences about these topics and your perspective and your story. What specifically can business leaders take away from your talks?
Trust and teamwork are extremely powerful things, and it's important that we recognize their value. We all need to learn to be more open to trust. Unfortunately, people like our politicians just say, trust us, and they do so many things that really betray trust. But the reality is, we ought to be open to trust. It doesn't mean that necessarily we're going to trust everyone, because the everyone might not earn our trust, but we should be open to the idea of trust. Leaders don't need to do some of the things they do. Leaders shouldn't boss people around. One of the things that I told every salesperson that I ever hired, and that I still tell to people, is I hired you to be a salesperson. I didn't hire you to boss you around. I hired you because you convinced me in our sales interview, which in reality is of course, a job interview is a sales presentation anyway. What I tell these people is my job is to figure out with you ways for me to add value to what you do to enhance you. And the people who really got that were very successful working for me. The people who didn't and wouldn't take advantage of that weren't necessarily as successful, and there are reasons for that. But I think that leaders need to recognize that leading doesn't mean bossing people around, and it shouldn't. Leaders need to find ways to get people to recognize the value of the leader and how a leader can help them add value to what they do. And it's something that doesn't happen nearly as much as it should. Leaders should be able to command respect by their actions, not by just saying, I'm your boss, you should respect me. It doesn't work that way. Leaders also need to recognize that there will be times that there will be people that they have under them as employees who may have skills that they don't have, and they should realize when to let those skills shine from those other people. It will enhance them as well as leaders. So the fact of the matter is leadership is really all about enhancing a team effort if it's done right. And that's something that most people really need to recognize, because it will make their jobs easier and it will make them and their people more successful.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate your time. Um, Michael will be the motivational speaker at the ASI Power Summit in California in October. Head to asipowersummit.com to register. Thanks for listening. And Michael, thanks again for talking with me.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.